computer. Oh, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us wherever you are and whatever time it is for you. I couldn't be happier to have the opportunity to speak to Dr. Matt Lee about leadership, love, and flourishing. It has been the greatest privilege to get to know Matt and have the opportunity to collaborate with him and work on such important topics, and I cannot even begin to tell you all how much I have learned from Matt and how much I've enjoyed our collaborations. Matt is the Director of Empirical Research at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University, and is an exceptionally well-received professor there. His student ratings are out of this world, and the qualitative feedback he receives is just fabulous and completely unsurprising. So I couldn't be happier to get the opportunity to have a conversation with Matt about something that is so important and makes such a difference to everybody's lives, especially in education and in our family lives, as well as our organizations. So Matt, please may I start by asking you a big question?
Sure, it's great to be here, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. So Matt, we're just going to dive straight in. What does love mean for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, when we think about love, we can understand it as, you know, as others have. You know, Aquinas talked about love as kind of a desire for the good of the other and a desire to be in relationship with the other. And that's really helpful. You know, we think about love as having more than one component. It's not just one thing. It sort of includes a lot. So we want to contribute to the well-being of the person that we love, and we want to somehow be in relationship with them, even if we're not in person, you know, necessarily, but there's some kind of connection that's meaningful to us. And that, in fact, is the understanding of love that we've started with in our planned research project at the Human Flourishing Program on interpersonal love. We want to understand how that gets lived out in a variety of kinds of relationships, you know, parent-child relationships, even strangers, or perhaps even enemies. What does love look like in these different kinds of relationships, and what effect does it have in terms of other elements of well-being, other domains of flourishing? And so I think that's really helpful. You know, oftentimes we think of love as a feeling, as an emotion. And it is partly that, but other people say, wait a minute, you know, love is really about doing something. It's an action, it's a verb. And as I've been reflecting on this over the years, it seems to me, and I think other people have articulated parts of this as well, that love is not just a feeling or an action, not just a noun or a verb, but it's a grammar. We bring together the constituents of love. And, you know, what might we include? Well, you know, certainly a sense of empathy for the other person, a sense of commitment, a sense of, you know, warmth towards them. So there's a lot of these constituents that we might bring together as we have these feelings or as we take these actions. But love seems to be bigger than that. So we want to bring together these constituents, these individual components, in a way that reflects practical wisdom. And so we're not trying to make people's lives worse. And if we love ineffectively, that might be the outcome. And so we want to create a grammar that helps us organize these constituents with practical wisdom, and that in a way that ultimately tells a life-affirming story. So what is actually producing flourishing? What in the long run is leading us to greater health and well-being? And so I think that if we think about love in that way, we avoid some of the confusion about love that relates to, you know, think about Romeo and Juliet. You know, they did not have a good outcome. You know, suicide is never a good outcome, but there's a kind of, you know, teenage infatuation that might include warmth or some of these constituent parts, but not put together in a way that we would suggest reflects practical wisdom and that tells a story of flourishing over time. It's really a tragedy. So we want to think about love in ways that empower us to be well and do well. And that's really what we mean by flourishing, is seeking and achieving to some extent all of the domains of well-being, complete well-being.
And what does complete well-being mean for you, Matt? That was such a beautiful explanation of love, and I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit before we come back to love.
Yes, I'd also be very interested in your understanding of both love and well-being. When we think about flourishing, we can flourish as individuals, but we always flourish because others have loved us into being. And so we understand our role in both giving and receiving love, and that we grow together. You know, we flourish together in a more robust way than we would on our own. And so I think we can talk about flourishing at the individual level as being comprised of a number of domains like happiness and life satisfaction, meaning and purpose, growing as a good person, character and virtue, building satisfying and healthy social relationships, physical and emotional health, you know, all the rest. So we can say that it would be ideal to do or to be well in all of these domains, but we can also look at flourishing at the collective level, at the level of our communities or our families or our society or the human family as a whole. And we could ask the question, are we creating, in the words of one of our friends in the community of practice, a more vibrant space of trust? You know, are we really helping people develop their gifts and talents through a community that has this this vibrant space of trust, that has a sense of mission and purpose, that is clear about the contributions that we can all make and wants to invite those contributions? And then can we do this in a way that's actually healthy for the broader environment? Or are we extracting our individual and collective well-being at the cost of the natural environment? And so if we're creating more regenerative spaces as we're flourishing individually and collectively, I think that that gets us closer to complete well-being. And we sometimes think about this as intersystemic flourishing. So it's not just about the individual, it's not just about the community, but it's the relationship between individuals and communities embedded within an ecological system. So that's what I've been pondering of late. But what do the words love and flourishing mean to you, Katy? I would love to get your insight and wisdom.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you so much. And I don't think I'll be nearly as articulate on it. But no, I couldn't agree more that love is so much more than a feeling, and it absolutely involves action and a lot of responsibility as well. I fully agree that love is about empowering people to flourish around you. And through that empowerment, you're also empowering yourself to flourish. Also really love the idea that we don't flourish in isolation. No man or woman is an island, and we absolutely, if we are flourishing individually, then that will influence those around us to flourish. Equally, if we're languishing or those around us are languishing, that's going to affect our flourishing. So I think the idea of taking a community lens, and we're getting quite excited about kind of communitarian understandings of flourishing, and that's an area that we're wanting to dig into a bit more. Obviously I've got a bit of a background in geography, so your point about sustainable flourishing both for the environment and for humans, and having that really positive symbiotic relationship where we're actually creating regeneration and regenerative spaces for the humans, but also for the ecosystems where we're complementing one another, I think is also really powerful and really relevant for all leaders on the earth and all humans as well.
Well, one question that I've been eager to ask, and I know that you work with young leaders around the world through global social leaders and other groups. How does the idea of flourishing in love connect with the younger generation? Are they energized by it? Does this mean something, or do these terms seem a bit strange sometimes when you talk about them?
Oh, I just love that question. Thank you so much, Matt, because this young generation coming through, I just find them to be so much more engaged with the idea of complete well-being and flourishing, not just for themselves, but also for others. I think it's incredibly exciting seeing how proactive they are at trying to promote the flourishing of others, particularly through their determination to improve equity, to improve social justice, and to improve the environment and the way we look after the environment. So I think we probably, and they're very accepting of the word love, much more than perhaps our generation, who are a bit like, oh my goodness. And like you referred to Romeo and Juliet, it's too attached to teenage infatuation. I don't see the young people I work with generally being closed off to the idea of love as being this beneficial love that promotes flourishing and empowers others. I love that you call it beneficial love. I think that's a really, really helpful way of understanding it. And I think beneficial is a term that works really well for young people and for older people as well, because we all kind of get what beneficial means. Bene links to good, which I think also is something that we can understand and build a common language around. So yeah, I'm really excited by the commitment of the young people I get to work with to global flourishing. And I'm also humbled by it, because when I think of what I was like as a teenager, I was utterly hopeless in comparison, absolutely clueless. It was a miracle if I did my homework, let alone, trying to promote equal opportunities, whatever your gender or sexual orientation or your race or whatever. I was so far from that as a teenager. So I'm also very humbled by the young people I work with.
Well, we always hope that the next generation will do better than we did. So I'm glad to see some evidence that that's happening. And I'm so glad that you connected love and flourishing to equity and justice, because a lot of times it seems like this conversation about leadership and flourishing and love is disconnected from those important issues. And I think that a lot of young people are indeed resonating with this idea that Martin Luther King Jr. and others have promoted, that, power is love implementing the demands of justice. Yes. And so, we're not talking about unhealthy love there. We have to be talking about beneficial love. And I would like to see the day when the word love would signify something beneficial, and I wouldn't need to call it beneficial love. But in the interim, there's, I think, a lot of confusion. But unhealthy love to me is not really love, because it doesn't connect with this contribution to the good of the other, which is really important in a lot of traditions that would understand love as something that is ultimately life affirming, something that is about unity rather than division. And if we're going to obscure equity and justice issues in talking about love, we're not going to be life affirming in the long run. And so this is why I think, there's an opportunity for leaders to talk about love more directly and with greater clarity. And so I was just at an event here at Harvard last night that brought some men in from Chicago for a conversation about love and leadership. And several of them had been incarcerated for committing murder, sometimes for 20 years incarcerated. And now they're trying to stop the cycle of violence out on the streets. They're trying to help de-escalate tense situations that involve guns. And they talked about love, and they said, this is really the work of love. We're bringing people together, rival gangs who otherwise would see every opportunity to harm each other. We're trying to help them see possibilities for dialogue and understanding and ultimately unity. And so it was just so encouraging to me that one of the speakers started off right away. by saying, when I reach out to some person that I'm going to mentor, I say to them, I'm going to love on you. Can you handle that? And a lot of times this is language that doesn't connect right away, but it's kind of unsettling. So it's kind of like, what do you mean by that? And then it invites a conversation about, what do we mean by love? Love is about, ultimately I'm going to contribute to your well-being, your deepest flourishing. And that means I've got to hold you accountable, and you're going to hold me accountable, and we're going to create healthy boundaries in our relationship so that we can be of benefit to each other. And so I find that really inspiring, that people are increasingly using the language of love, which wasn't as prominent, when in my past. When I heard leaders speak, they were often talking about achieving some instrumental aim, some narrow goal for their organization. But now there's often a broader conversation about, I just heard a CEO and president of a large family of global companies that makes, electrical equipment and is engaged in manufacturing. And he said, well, we build these products, but our number one product is the well-being of everybody in our organization.
Wow.
Really without exception. And so, we do this other thing as a means to an end, and the end is love. And so we're not just trying to make a profit. We're not just trying to meet a market need. We actually see our business as a platform for flourishing. And I just thought that was marvelous. And this particular leader uses the word care instead of love. And we had a little sidebar conversation about that. And he said, care just lands easier with some audiences. If I say love, I lose people. But I think, when you've spent 20 years in prison and you say love, I think, you can invite, conversation, and people are willing to listen. And maybe it's more difficult for presidents of business organizations. But I think that whatever we use to signify the thing that we ultimately care about, we have to be really clear about what our goal is, what our ultimate aim is. If we don't know what target we're aiming at, we're not going to hit the thing we care about. So whatever language can be received, I think it's really helpful for leaders to think about their audience and speak in ways that can be understood, but internally they need to know what they're aiming at. So, my hope is that if we connect love with flourishing in a very clear way, we can understand that all organizations are ultimately responsible for these outcomes. And whether they're in the business sector, the government sector, the nonprofit sector, religious, faith-based sector, whatever sector you're in, you can be aiming at this target. And we've got plenty of examples across all of these sectors of really high-performing organizations that have done marvelously well because they've taken this as their aim. So they're profitable in a business sense, not despite the fact that they're a loving organization, but because they're a loving organization.
Oh, Matt, that's such beautiful material there. And I think the example of where the people who had committed these crimes in the past were brought together and given love and shown love and given that opportunity is just so profound to show the impact that love has on human beings. And I think you're so right. We can afford to use the language that's going to land with people, but actually when we do choose to love, and actually I think it takes a lot of courage to say I'm going to love, because it makes you vulnerable. Because you could be rejected, you could be laughed at, you could be told that you're not a leader because this isn't about love, this is about profit. But actually I think what's really, really exciting, as you hinted at, is that what we're seeing is in organizations where they are loving and they do truly and genuinely care for the flourishing of people and actually the flourishing of the world, so that their mission is focused on actually making a contribution to the world and being regenerative and positive, they are doing exceptionally well in the bottom line. And so I think that's really, really exciting. And I love the other research that's really emerging more recently around kind of neuroscience and looking at what happens to the brain when you receive love, and how when actually you're in a loving relationship, your brain works an awful lot better. So you can remember things better. You can be much more creative. Your judgment is improved, and you're also much more empathetic. And all of these things are exceedingly good for the bottom line. So it feels like you're not having to drop the idea of making your shareholders happy or creating a profit. So you don't have to choose either love or business success, but actually you can have both, which I think is such a gift for the world. And I think, the more people see that, the more people hear that and understand that, the better the world's going to be. I just find it so exciting and encouraging.
That's so well put, and I'm glad you brought in the neuroscience, because this is really important. If we work against our own brains, we're going to burn out, or we're going to be demotivated. We want to be inspired, we want to be energized, we want to be motivated. And I think about this book, which is a great case study of love in action. The title of the book is "We Dare Say Love." And I like that they dare to say love, like they risked something. But it's about a school district in the United States that was having a really difficult time with intractable problems around racial disparities in academic achievement and the use of punitive measures against students in a disparate way. And they really had to step back and ask the question, what are we missing here? We've tried to solve this in various ways. We're getting nowhere.
Yeah.
And they stepped back and they said, what if we led with love? What if we really understood the students? And what if we tried to take that understanding into our work as educators? What would it look like? How would we reconfigure and reimagine? And that's really what leadership is: seeing where we're stuck, seeing what's impossible, and then reimagining and reconfiguring. And so they led with love, and it was just a remarkable response. And it was really the only way to move forward. And I think about, leaders oftentimes are stuck in what Bioethics and McKee in their book Resonant Leadership called the cycle of sacrifice.
Yes.
We're losing motivation. We're feeling like the burden is getting heavier on us, and we're just continuing to spiral down. But what happens if we enter a cycle of renewal, which works more skillfully with our brains and our nervous systems, and switch off the fight or flight response and turn on the tend and befriend response? And there's some strategies we can use to do that. And what happens when we do that and we start to do that collectively? And as I was thinking about our conversation today, I was reflecting on a book called Leadership: Lessons from Miracle Children. So I'll hold this up, and it tells the story of a president and CEO of a hospital in the community where I lived for a couple of decades. And the leader, this president of this organization, talked about what he learned from kids. So here's a picture of a kid. I don't know how clear this comes across, but this is Angie, and Angie was being treated by the hospital from the age of 9 to 13, and she finally passed away to her, as a result of her cancer. And while she was engaged with being an influence on the president of the hospital and the doctors and the nurses and every other person she came into conflict with, Bill Considine says that this profoundly ill child reversed the roles of patient and caregiver.
Yeah.
So the doctors and nurses were caring for her, but she was actually caring for them.
Wow.
How are you doing? How can I bring joy to you? So she started using creative arts to bring joy to them. And so she created these sun catchers that you hang in the window and it sort of sparkles. And she would give these out to visitors to the hospital, to nurses, to doctors. And she gave one to the president right before she died, and she didn't finish it. And I think in many ways, he was inspired by her example of working with the constraints of her life, the very difficult knowledge that she wasn't going to survive. And yet she did something beautiful with her life, with the time that she had. And this unfinished sun catcher was a reminder to him to continue her work.
Yes.
Her work is unfinished. And as the president, I can continue to build on the lessons that she taught me. So she influenced me and I can influence others. So when I go into a budget meeting,
Yes.
What role does love have in a meeting about budget and who gets resources and who does? Well, actually, it's really important for us to have clarity about building a moral, just, loving budget in a way that really helps us achieve more as an organization. These are not just financial decisions, and people are not just numbers on a page, but how can we really maximize the potential for flourishing within our organization? So as a leadership practice, this kind of lens, the lens of love and flourishing, really reorients us to something that's inspiring. And otherwise, these budget conversations, we're just trapped in this cycle of sacrifice. But if we start to think about it from a caring, loving perspective, it can be part of a cycle of renewal. And then we're working skillfully with the reward center in our brain rather than the pain center. And so we have practices like appreciative inquiry as a process to unlock this creative potential that is otherwise inhibited when people are so focused on problem solving. We've got all these problems and we've got all of this intractable difficulty, and how can we solve these problems? Well, why don't we start by noticing when we're fully alive?
Yes.
Why don't we notice the best of what's happening in our organization and build on that? Not as a way to escape from problems, but as a way to open some creative thinking and get some possibilities onto the table that we might not otherwise be considering. So to me, that's really, lessons from miracle children. Angie is someone who had more limitations than most of us will encounter in our so-called leadership roles, but she was really teaching us how to be a loving leader in caring for others in a way that helped profoundly shape how this president was going to lead his organization and be a community leader within the broader world.
Oh, that's just two such absolutely fabulous stories. Thank you so much, Matt. And I guess one of the things I take, especially from Angie's story, is that when we look at leadership through the lens of love, it becomes available to absolutely every human being on the planet, because everybody has the capacity to love and to give love and be loving. So we always say that leadership is absolutely not restricted to someone in a so-called leadership position or role, but actually, the 3-year-old in the playground who stands up for someone or invites the new kid to come and play with them, that's an act of leadership, because that's an act of love, and that is empowering that young person that they've helped to flourish. The kid who helps the teacher when they've accidentally dropped the plates on the floor, that kid is leading, and they are empowering the teacher to flourish and showing them support and showing them care. And it's the same with our kind of 97-year-old in the care home who's going around and checking that the other patients and indeed the nurses and the doctors are all okay, and they're the ones making the cups of tea for people. And so what's wonderful about this is that leadership becomes much more equitable. It becomes available to everybody, and it's very much more a choice. And I guess that you mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. earlier, and I think, his Drummer Boy speech, which is about the choice to serve. And if you want to be great, then you choose to serve. I think it's that idea, because you don't need A stars, in the British system. You don't need to be the captain of a sports team. You don't need to be a CEO to love, and therefore you don't need to be any of those things to be a great leader, because you can make that choice to serve and be loving and give your love.
There's so many wonderful points in what you're sharing there. And, where I go immediately is to your notion of empowerment. And so the leader, we can think about the leader as the person that holds the title that's most prestigious, but that's not really what leadership's about. Leadership is not about individuals at all. It's about the capacity of the system to empower people to achieve their collective goals.
Yes.
So we have to have some awareness about what our collective goals are. Yes. And then we have to create a context where we can all contribute to that deeper shared purpose. And so where love is just so helpful is that love, philosophers have said this, I think most clearly, that we don't fully see another person until we love them. So our awareness is limited until we have this faculty of love that we're using very effectively to notice something about the potential of the other people to become their best possible selves. And they're noticing something about us so that we can become our best possible selves. And then we can create a container that holds space for that to happen. And so we're attending to the, in a gardener's metaphor, to the conditions of the soil, yes, so that we can all grow, we can all flourish. And the reason that because people hear the word service, they think burden.
Yes.
Oh, I've got to serve. Like,
yeah,
I've got to put in my hour a week of service, to
yes,
fulfill my obligation as a citizen of this society. But when you love others, it's really a joy. It's not a burden. And so I think, Kierkegaard talked about the debt that we incur when someone receives our help. So we often think like, I've done something for you, now you're indebted to me. No, actually, you have helped me reveal who I really am by giving me an opportunity to serve. So I'm in your debt. Yeah. Even though, we think of service as that's a cost to me and a benefit to you. It's actually a benefit to me, and perhaps a greater benefit when you understand it through the lens of love. So our perspective and our awareness is really important. And service becomes a joy when we see that our purpose in life is to empower people to become their best possible selves. And their purpose is to empower us to become our best possible selves. And then you're really in this kind of virtuous cycle that is energizing to everybody. And then service is, it's not about self-preservation, like I've got to serve for a while and then unplug so I can recharge my batteries. It's moving from self-preservation to self-expansion. I grow as a self because I have opportunities to serve, and I'm keenly aware that I'm incurring debts every time I serve. So it's paradoxically energizing to think about it in that way. But I do think that when you see someone like Angie with all of the physical difficulties of chemotherapy and declining health, being energized and energizing others around her, you can sort of catch a glimpse of what it means to serve joyfully. And that means, you see through the lens of love that this is what we're here for. We have the possibility to realize our best possible self right now in this moment by seeing through the lens of love and then responding to ourselves and others accordingly. So anyway, I think it's really just another way for us to understand what it means to flourish. We're not just extracting for our own well-being, but we're giving in ways that, as a friend of mine says, in the giving of self lies the unsought discovery of a better self. So we're not trying to enhance our happiness, but happiness is a byproduct of, I would say, healthy giving. And at some point, again, just like love, I wouldn't want to have to say beneficial love or healthy love. And I wouldn't want to have to say healthy giving, because there's forms of giving that are maybe not healthy boundaries and other kinds of things. So we have to think about what it means to give in a healthy way, but true service is healthy. And so I think if we're connected with that, then the boundaries become clear. And there's, again, lots of philosophers and theologians who can put this more eloquently than I can. But I think it's a very inspiring conversation to have. It's not the cycle of sacrifice; it's the cycle of renewal.
Oh, absolutely, Matt, and so beautifully put. I don't think philosophers could put that more eloquently at all. And what's so lovely is, again, that the kind of psychological research, the health research, medical research actually really supports what you're saying. You see that people who are serving, people who are volunteering, they have better immunity, they live for longer, they're happier. And I love this idea that actually, joyfully serving, and then you get happiness as a byproduct. And it certainly doesn't work if you go and thinking, oh, I'm just going to go and volunteer for an hour because it'll make me happier. But actually, and this idea that you had of seeing people, and if you truly, truly see them, that's when you can really love them and really serve them, to empower them to be their best selves, and they can reciprocate that for you and build these really beautiful relationships. But this idea of kind of seeing them first and them seeing you, and through that idea of seeing them, you also reveal your best self, is, I think, a really exciting concept, both in education and in leadership. I think that's a really relevant point, and also something that can be done very joyfully, because every time you take the time to know someone better, then you are going to see more of their strengths, more of their gifts, more of what they can bring to the world, more of their potential, which I think is joyful in itself, and highly purposeful, like you say, and fulfilling.
Well, these men that I referenced, who are trying to disrupt violence in Chicago, they can see in the 16-year-old who's carrying the gun and, you know, one incident away from ruining someone else's life and ruining their life too, and all the ripple effects of that in the community and in the family. They can see the potential in this person that others have given up on, because they know I was that person. And so I can love forth the good in that person. And that's an act of leadership, because, you know, I think the best leaders look at impossible circumstances and ask the question, what can I do here? And, you know, I'm thinking about the head administrator of we're getting some, there we are. I'm thinking about the head administrator of a high school in the United States who opened his school as a sanctuary in the summertime, in the evenings, for students who were being victimized on the street and didn't have anywhere to go. And so where in the manual of being a leader of this school does it say that you're supposed to open the doors of your school in the summertime when the school is not in session? But he saw an opportunity to bring the resources that he had available to him to bear on a problem that was really essential to the learning of the students in his school. If they're not safe and if they've been traumatized over and over again, you can't learn. So this is really going back to neuroscience. The neurosequential model of learning is that you have to be able to regulate your emotions, you have to be able to relate to other people, and then you can reason. And if you've been traumatized and you're dysregulated in many ways, then your ability to learn, your ability to achieve academically is going to be affected. So an administrator who perceives the interconnections here between safety and trauma and flourishing and love, and he says very explicitly, you know, we loved these kids, and so we opened the door of our schools, and we did other things for them that were beyond the sort of normal policies and normal operations, standard operating procedures of schools in the United States. But we didn't have a choice because love demands it. And so we can see in these young people great potential, and we can see it being snuffed out by these dreadfully traumatic experiences. And so we see that we're not going to be bystanders. We have a responsibility. We have to take action. So what resources do we have at our disposal? And it turns out that we have more at our disposal than we think. And I think the really amazing, influential leaders are the ones who can recognize how to bring together resources in a way that other people were maybe not so creative. And that's, you know, by asking the question, what is the loving thing to do here? What is going to produce flourishing? And, you know, as we know from countless examples, any organization that says our number one job is to make a profit is not going to be very profitable in the long run. Or our number one job is just high test scores for our students. Well, that's not really motivating or inspiring. But if we really care deeply about the flourishing of not only the customers or clients or students that we serve, but thinking about promoting flourishing more generally in the world, then that is inspiring, and that does energize people to think more creatively and to start this appreciative inquiry process. So anyway, I could go on for much longer, but I know we're coming to a close with our time. But I just really hope that this conversation sparks further conversation about what it means to be a leader, and, you know, what does it mean to go beyond the role of bystander, so that we can become, in the words of one group that has tried to connect flourishing with equity, better stewards of the system. So we have a role to play in our organization, but our organization fits into a broader system. And how can all of the leaders of these organizations become better stewards of the system so that we can tend to the conditions of the soil and promote flourishing for everyone without exception?
Oh, Matt, just so beautiful. Honestly, I could speak to you all night and then the next day and night, probably for a good few months or years about this. That has just been so inspiring and so powerful and just the biggest joy. And I really, really, really hope that we can continue this conversation with part 2, because I think there's so much more to explore. But just the biggest thank you to you for your time, and yeah, such a wise and inspiring conversation.
Well, thank you, Katie, for being an equal co-host in this conversation. So I always learn so much from you as well. And thank you for your leadership in our community of practice. And, you know, anyone who might be interested in connecting with the community can find us on the internet at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, and just look for community of practice. And it's just such a great joy to find collaborators who are interested in connecting love and leadership for greater flourishing.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank
and
you.
hopefully see you soon.
Yes.